Welcome to Conversations with Ryland Fisher, and today we're talking to Baleka Mbete, the Speaker of the National Assembly. Welcome. So, you trained as a teacher and you also a published poet. Do you sometimes feel that those might have been better career options to, than your life in politics?
I enjoy what I do in politics. Politics for me is an all-rounded career of giving your energies, giving your time, giving your everything to that which will advance the values that will take our people, improve things for our citizens, create or at least contribute towards creating a better future for our children and for future generations. So for me, that's a much broader context within which to utilize whatever skills I might have picked up in life, because I don't think it's enough to simply train as a nurse and all you do is go to a hospital, come home, hospital, come home. But in politics, you are everywhere where you are required to be, where your energies are needed. And in today's politics, of course, we come into politics through the organizations we are members of. And so in that way, I think I don't regret being where I am.
And so, do you also think that there are some people who say, you have the struggle and then you have politics, and that there is a difference between the two?
Maybe there's a way in which you can say that. But for me, the struggle was a very noble period and a phase in the progression of our people in South Africa. We continue to struggle. You can't quite say it's ended, because we're still working towards ideals of a better future. We're still working for that which we call the National Democratic Society. When society will have dealt with its current ills that continue from a past when we used to struggle. So it seems to me that you can't quite have a straight line between struggle and politics, because what people call politics continues to be, at least for us who come from my organization, struggling to attain that which we set ourselves when we in fact embarked on struggle. We still have not attained it. We still have not finished working towards that which we would like to create as a new South Africa for future generations.
No, you spend most of your life in struggle. If you reflect back on your life, are there some things that stand out for you? Some highlights, for instance?
Now when I look back, I think the period I look back to and I feel, wow, those were the days when one came across some of the people that we regard as giants of our struggle, giants of the new South Africa, people without whose role we would not have been able to be where we are. Today we talk about the Constitution. We must never forget that this Constitution did not fall from heaven like a manna. This Constitution was worked on, was thought through by no less a figure than Oliver Reginald Tambo, leading a team of our comrades with the right skills, having gone to school, people like Zola Skweyiya, people like Bridget Mabandla. And he led that team in thinking through projecting forward into what it would be like to actually create a new constitutional order. And in fact gave us what we now have as 34 constitutional principles, which we hardly think about, which in fact was the basis when finally we went around the world. We went to the OAU at the time, we went to the UN, and we sold this submission we called the Harare Declaration, which was a sum total of that which, as the people of South Africa, both inside the country, under the UDF, under the Mass Democratic Movement, under the ANC in exile, we all said this is the kind of South Africa we would want to create. So when we finally have a team of South Africans coming together, talking and actually pushing us to an agreement that this is the kind of society we would like to work towards, that was what the leadership of Oliver Tambo gave us. And by the time he gets a stroke, he is selling this platform. He is selling this set of values. And today we have, as part of what is a schedule of the Constitution, the constitutional principles. And for me, those were the days to come across those human beings whom I look back and think of, and I believe I was very honored. I was very lucky just to have rubbed shoulders, not to have worked very intensely with them necessarily. And when one came back to South Africa, and of course the old ladies that I came across who molded us, Masi Sulu was with us, Mashope is still alive, she's 92 now, May Ruth left us last year. For me, that was the best time of my life, because you met these people and they struck you. They influenced how you see life, how you understand what a cadre should be, how you see what a leader is. People who were both parents and leaders at the same time. And they were international activists at the same time. They talked about South Africa. They talked to you about issues that matter to you as an individual in a very caring manner. So very rounded human beings, because OR was one such person. You hear stories about him. I mean, now as speaker in the past few years, I met the former speaker of Zambia, Speaker Mwana Mwamba. You should listen to him and his wife talk about OR, because apparently OR used their house as one of the safe houses, and he would sometimes spend nights there or maybe a week, and they would talk about him and his attitude towards how he related to them, and how when it was his turn to cook, he wanted the kitchen clear and clean, and he would give his all towards cooking for the family that day. That was just a human being, but yet such a great man. So for me, the best time in life was the time I was able to come across such individuals. And then when we came home, you know, one met the Sisulus, one met the Mandelas. For me, that was the best time, because once a generation is gone, only then you realize how much it meant, the kind of value that they carried with them, in the way they carried themselves, in the way they related to other people. Not the way I see present day South Africa, for instance, relating to elders. I believe it's quite sad.
Yeah, We'll get back to that. So in those early years, I mean, did you ever imagine that you would one day be the Speaker of Parliament or even the Deputy President of the country? Was there something that you aspired towards?
No, never entered my head. In the early 90s, I always remember I had a task to speak in London, in fact in the UK, about the then pending referendum. If you remember, FW declared as referendum, trying to gauge the extent to which there would be support, in particular in white South Africa, for the negotiations. So the ANC had to tell the world what its own position was on the matter. And at some point, I think I was sent by the Women's League to speak in the UK. So one went all over the place, and I remember getting to Scotland and to a primary school, and a little girl asked me, I had been speaking, explaining South Africa, its history, in summary, and what was happening at that point, and what the ANC believed. And this little girl asked me, ma'am, when South Africa gets to have its elections, will you be a parliamentarian? Are you going to be one of those that avail yourself to be a parliamentarian? I said, no. No. It had never occurred to me. And when we were leaving that school with an elderly comrade who was driving me around, she said to me, I hope you were joking, eh? I said, I'm not joking. So she started engaging me, and it was the first time it occurred to me, oh, could it be possible that I could have to go to Parliament? But that was never the idea. You know, that was never the idea. The idea was always that we had our leaders. We had our elders. We believed in them. We never struggled because there was a particular place for us individually. You did what you were deployed, what you had been trained, and what you had been honored to be tasked to do. And indeed, I came home and the same question arose from a comrade, and again I said no, because now that we were approaching the list process, the first time we were going to have a list process. And I remember thinking, no, I've got nothing to do with being in the list and so on, but the rest is history. That comrade engaged me quite robustly and came from the perspective that said, you are one of the leading cadres in respect of the Women's League, and historically your role even back in exile. I was always either with the publicity or with arts and culture or with the Women's League. So, you know, I mean, that has followed me right through my life. So again, that comrade engaged me. And it's only after that that I started realizing that maybe one has no option, because indeed, having taken a leading role in the structures in relation to that sector, you cannot then retreat and still make sense when you pursue the arguments that you pursue about the role of women, the right and the positions and the rights and the issues and whatever it was that we had been able to achieve in that respect.
Okay, so this is the second time that you've been Speaker of the National Assembly, and it appears that things have been very different and difficult this time compared to the first time. So to what do you attribute this?
I attribute it to developments in politics. I mean, what the issues are at a particular moment in the history of the society is not determined by any one of us, whether us as organizations or as individuals or as parties that end up coming into the institution. And so the phenomenon of the particular organization or party that had been created before the last elections is really the main factor that has ended up characterizing the fifth parliament as a very stormy one, as one that has those moments of eruptions of unusual and unfortunate, in my view, behavior or conduct by members of parliament. Because it's something that when people sit out there, they look into parliament and they just feel this can't be our parliament. And indeed, it shouldn't be, but it takes a lot more than our wishes, whether we are feeling amused by the conduct, because some people think, oh, it's a big joke, oh, it makes parliament interesting. I don't believe so. I actually believe it does harm. I believe there are sectors out there, and indeed, we've been engaged by certain generations in society who have expressed great disappointment, who have expressed anger. You know, elders, as we move around, express themselves very openly about how disappointed they are that parliament should be the way it is. But these are actually moments, but it's moments that in their drama attract the kind of attention, but also negativity. Because in my view, the negativity that lasts is how younger South Africans watching and seeing this drama begin to believe that this is the way to interact, this is the way to relate, this is how you make things interesting, or you assert yourself, or you raise your issues. This is the way to relate to authority, so to say. So I think there's a great deal of unfortunate developments in the fifth parliament. But I must also use the opportunity to say the mistake must never be made to think that those are the major moments, or that's all that happens in parliament are those dramas. I think people must realize that it's a time that is prime time, in as far as it's a time when people's attention is glued to the TV and people are watching this, and it's dramatic, it's exciting, but in actual fact, parliament is about a whole lot more work in various structures and times and areas of work of parliament.
Do you think there's any merit in the argument that there's a conflict between your position as an ANC leader and being Speaker of the National Assembly?
What's interesting is that this issue is coming up for the first time now in the fifth parliament, whereas it has happened before and nobody noticed. It was never raised, it was never an issue. When a presiding officer, and at that time the presiding officer presided over the National Council of Provinces, was a national chairperson of the African National Congress. He held two positions and they continued and nobody raised any issue. But in the fifth parliament, it has come up as a tool, as part and parcel of those, an arsenal of issues that gets drawn on and gets pulled out from time to time and gets, in my view, manipulated to create a particular impression. So I don't think it's really an issue. In our system, the question of a person having to step down from political office where they come from is not an issue, has never happened, has never been brought up. Doesn't mean South Africans can't change, or future parliaments cannot rethink the system and say, you know what, we think a better system is to go the way the House of Commons does it, because Once you become a speaker, then you step down from political office or even political membership. You simply don't go to caucus, you're not part. That's not the case in our system. It's not an issue. When you are in your role or office as a presiding officer, you use the rules that govern how that role is played within the institution. Finish. It's the same thing as the fact that Helen Zille was premier of Western Cape, but he was also the head of the party. The two roles really did not need to clash. Same thing as presidents, heads of political organizations, but also head of the country, president of the country. President Obama is also president of the country.
Do you get the sense that that the opposition is targeting you because of your position in the ANC? Maybe because you're a woman? I mean, do you think that this targeting of you is fair or unfair?
You know, most of the time in my role as speaker, but also even in my role as national chairperson, I've hardly ever felt I was targeted as a woman per se. Maybe when I sit to reflect one day and I write my memoirs, I will discover those subtle areas through which perhaps I could examine that particular phenomenon. I think there are things that lend themselves to use by the opposition in their many arguments when they are trying to score political points. And I think that from time to time they go that direction. But I wouldn't say it's a phenomenon I've come across overwhelmingly in my place. Now and again, it's easy for them to do that, and they utilize it politically. And I think, I mean, politics is like that. People will use anything.
So you've been accused by some members of the opposition of defending the president and ministers sympathetic to him. At the same time, the president has threatened to no longer answer questions in parliament if opposition MPs continue to abuse him. So what is the truth here? I mean, are you defending the president? Are you not defending the president?
I am maintaining order to the best of my abilities, and so do other presiding officers. And I have no doubt it's not an easy thing. And while the opposition feel I should be, from the chair, an extension of their political games, I have no doubt that the executive, in particular the president, are far from happy, because as far as they're concerned, we should just in the first 5 minutes check out whoever in the opposition are targeting them. It's a very difficult position to be. And you know, one day I did say to the president when he was saying that if he was a presiding officer, he would just deal with the EFF within the first 5 minutes and out. I just said, President, believe me, you don't want to be a presiding officer. That's all I could say to him, because it's difficult to explain to a person who is not in that chair that it's easier said than done. I think that's all I can say. They say I protect the president. President is very, very unconvinced that I'm protecting him. So I guess I'll die in between the two Nopkiris.
Over the years, particularly since 1994, there have been attempts to make Parliament more accessible to the public. However, if reports over the weekend are to be believed, you intend to improve or increase security and in the process restrict access to Parliament. Is this true, and why do you need to do this?
Actually, the issue of the security of Parliament is not my issue. It's not my intention. It's not an individual matter. I think South Africa will remember the images of May 2016, the last incident before we went to the elections, when the issue of the security of Parliament, including the physical effectiveness of the whole issue of access and measures that even other parliaments in the world utilize, came under spotlight. And I think there was no doubt in the minds, certainly of members of parliament, that a lot more had to be done.
And these are members of the opposition also?
Members of all political parties. You know, when we had a meeting here the other day, I was reminding them, and then I was also updating the others who had not maybe attended the whole meeting in May, the meeting that had been held in May. The chief whip of the DA was one of those who very strongly spoke about the issue of security. The fact that members of parliament had to feel secure in their workplace, which is a valid point. I remember Reverend Mishwe talking about the fact that he had never felt so unsafe in 21 years he had been here in parliament. So,
and the EFF, what's their view on this?
The EFF came in and out, they walked out, they were not there. You know, sometimes when they don't like the deliberations or the issue at hand, they just go away. So they were not here all the time, even if they had popped in at the beginning. And so we focused on this matter. Mind you, there had already been work done by the security forces themselves. The South African Police Services had done a study, they had investigated and already had submitted a report, which they then went back to. They also went back to the whole question of state security, the whole question of what's our policy framework in relating to this issue. Which institutions are your national key points and what does that mean? You know, it was a range of issues and they came around to us during the campaign period to the executive authority, that is the speaker and the chair. And we had received reports, we knew what they were doing, how they were going to take further the provisions and recommendations of the report that I'm referring to, that the South African Police Services had already submitted. The fact that, in fact, Public Works is the one that holds the budget for ensuring that Parliament is secure. And there are structures, there's security policy and so on. So it's not a Mbete issue. We met here, we called them again when we came back because we had to give them feedback of how far we've gone, how long we think it will take before we can attend to various issues according to the work that had been done. And indeed, we will do that which we are able to do, that which is urgent to do, that which is necessary according to the investigation results. It's not a question of what I want, what I don't want. The issue of security, and this, the chairperson of the National Council of Provinces reported to the meeting, is an issue in all parliaments all over the world. This issue is not a joke. It's an issue that, in fact, we would have preferred that the issue doesn't arise because we've always believed in a people's parliament and we're going to continue believing in a people's parliament. But it can't be a people's parliament at the expense of the people who have to work here and serve the people of South Africa. So, for instance, issues like we don't want to be searched, our bags to be searched when we walk in and out of parliament. We have to abandon that luxury because it has been found that members of parliament have brought in weapons into parliament. When we sit here and somebody pulls out a gun and injures or kills another one, are we going to say, oh no, we were pursuing a people's parliament? No, we have a responsibility here to do things according to the dictates of the needs of every moment in the life of the parliament itself. So yes, we want a people's parliament and people will have access to parliament, but we will now be looking more closely at what are the dictates of the different needs in parliament. You can't have a person walking around when they were coming in to visit someone whom they could have seen in a particular section of parliament and suddenly find their way to these corridors right here next to the offices of the deputy speaker and the speaker and so on. So we can't be irresponsible because we want to be seen to be open and allowing ourselves to be accessed. Go to any parliament in the world. Go to the House of Commons. Every space is zoned. It is known that here, this area is only for offices. It's only for the staff of parliament. This area here are the offices of the staff of the members of parliament of a particular party, and so on and so forth. And we are going to do that which makes sense. We are going to take responsibility for everything, including the security of the people who work in parliament.
You were talking earlier about the workings of parliament outside of the kind of the big dramatic moments that one sees on TV. So what happens in those committees when the TV cameras, I mean, what's the kind of the relationship between members of parliament from opposition parties?
I think when the public watches debates in the House, a wrong impression could be created that members of parliament, according to political parties, are enemies. Actually, nothing could be further from the truth. In committees is where people sit and just talk and exchange ideas according to the item on the agenda, according to the issues presented by documents and reports that are before them. And people genuinely, just as human beings, exchange views. So they persuade one another, they listen to each other, and they do hear when another person is making a good point. So, in fact, they make very strong friendships and relationships as just South Africans. And in particular, when they travel together, either to outlying areas in the country or even they travel abroad, they really get to know one another. So I think it must be understood that people here are just human beings like any other member of society or of a community. So they do build relationships. I think the work in committees is the environment there is better conducive to people grappling more with the issues than with political difference per se. I think that a lot more hard work is put into issues at that level than by the time. It's only when, of course, various political parties might take a particularly strong position on a matter that then clearly that issue becomes more contentious. It might be an issue on which the members of one party will come back and say, hey, yeah, we're going to war. Oh, is that so? Yes. And things are dealt with more on the basis of how strongly various political persuasions would like to push a particular issue? To what extent is it possible to persuade one another, to try and see whether we can't come together? I mean, it's the same everywhere, even with the Rules Committee, for instance. It's taken a number of years before political parties have processed issues in the rule book, because on various matters, there are different perspectives. If I may make an example, the issue of dress code has never arisen in the new South African Parliament. It's never been a big issue until the Fifth Parliament, and you know why. So it's a matter that has been very, very strongly canvassed, and we now have the new rules. We are yet to see how it's going to pan out, because also when you have rules, you still have to work on guidelines. Guidelines take you to the implementation level, because you can have a rule and it's more a general statement about your intention, but the guideline will go further into a bit more detail as to what is envisaged and how it's going to work out and what happens when what doesn't happen. You know, all those series of issues. So Parliament is a place where a lot of work happens. It's so much that it's difficult to explain, you know. And of course, our work also involves oversight, which means it's not just questions in the House. It's also going out to see how issues are actually making or not making an impact down on the lives of our people in rural areas, in squatter camps, all over the country where the lives of our people are lived out. Is it true that these things that we have agreed on as policies, as legislation, how is it helping us to regulate relations between poor people on the ground and local government and the various, say, the police and other institutions and state organs in the real daily life of our people?
So these issues that has kind of almost bedeviled Parliament, do you think they will ever be resolved? Do you think, I mean, what do you think will it take to resolve issues and to effectively normalize Parliament?
I think what it will take is for all members of Parliament to be of the mind that yes, Parliament is a place where we express ourselves freely, we express ourselves honestly, but with respect. We must all be of the mind that Parliament is a place where we must illustrate the best of what human beings can do together. We've got to be able to maintain the kind of level of decorum as adults that, in fact, when our children or younger South Africans watch, they see that is the way to be. I look forward to be in that kind of environment. It will take for all of us collectively to know that, yes, we must express difference because we are different. We come from different persuasions. We, in fact, are here to illustrate that difference does not mean we must be adversarial. Difference does not mean we are enemies. Difference simply means we have a different approach to various matters. And I think that if we can conduct ourselves like we used to, in the first 4 parliaments, we always knew that we go to elections, we put a manifesto, our people decide how many of them support the various manifestos. We come to Parliament with a set of intentions and policies and priorities that we want to push. And the one who has had the honor to have attracted more support from the electorate then has to come, and we all fall in line in recognizing that that is the outcome of the elections. What has unfortunately happened in the Fifth Parliament is we've arrived here and started to conduct ourselves as though we want to challenge the election result. We want to immediately say, no, we hear what the people said. They have supported these ones, but we actually want to throw them out. I think that is the unfortunate development, and I don't believe that is a permanent character of Parliament. I think it's a passing moment, and I think that very soon the people of South Africa will realize that perhaps some of us ought not to be here, or some of us must be persuaded to grow up and to conduct ourselves in a manner that is in keeping with the reality of the adult world, the reality of how, as was illustrated by no less a leader than Nelson Mandela, you can go out and put out a hand and listen to and conduct yourselves decently with a person who's actually supposed to be your opponent, but who has support from whatever number of South Africans and therefore has a right to be there. So I think it's a passing moment. I think we will get over it.
Now, you were the Speaker of Parliament and you became Deputy President. Then, immediately after that, you resigned from Parliament. And then, recently you decided to come back to Parliament. So what happened? I mean, firstly, why did you resign at the time? And what changed to make you decide to come back?
You know, these things are not quite an individual's decision. At the time, in discussion with the president, I went to work full-time for the party. So throughout the fourth parliament, I was in Luthuli House, and thank God it fell on me to be given the task to help with the spearheading of the centenary program of marking the 100 years of the African National Congress. So I'm very grateful for that time, because otherwise I wouldn't have been able to be exposed to that wealth of what that program took me through. So of course, at the end of that term was the election in 2014, and the branches nominated me, and the rest is history. That's what happens. So there's very little space for an individual's decisions. Of course, if you felt strongly enough about things, you could, but it has not happened to me that I have just said, I want this, I want the other. No, not in the life of my organization.
Maybe let's move a little bit away from Parliament. What do you think about the call in some quarters for the ANC to elect a woman president?
Well, I've always thought that the ANC has always had opportunities through the ages from its founding, because it had people of the caliber of Charlotte Maxeke. And over the years, there have been many, many great women, the Masisulus. In fact, she was, at the time, while she presided over the UDF, in the absence of Oliver Tambo, who was presiding over the external mission, virtually the president here in terms of our people and the struggle at the time under the various formations. So the ANC has always had that opportunity, but it's the culture. It is what people have been exposed to, what people have been socialized to accept as a norm. I don't see what the big deal is. I mean, women are playing a role all over the place now. They are mayors, they are this, they are the other, they are the premier, you know, they are speakers. So I don't think it's a big deal right now. I think it's just a matter of the culture and the moment arriving where indeed through its normal mechanisms of the branches, the right decisions being taken. And I mean, it's a matter that then happens at that point.
And so if that moment arrives, do you think you could be the Duma?
I'm not going to be trapped to answer that question because it's a question that we've been reported to have said things we never said. So it's really a question that I am not willing to answer because it's only when the ANC opens that question up that we can all feel free to think or say anything along those lines.
Mm. So you're not thinking about the next step in the progression. You have been deputy president, so the next logical step would be...
We don't do that. We don't do that here.
We're getting to the end of the interview, but maybe I can ask you in a different way. What qualities do you think the president of South Africa should have?
I think what's important, because I believe in the correctness of the historical mandate that the ANC has been given as leader of society. So for me, it has to be an ANC cadre through and through. I believe the rest will follow that. Because if indeed you are truly steeped in the ANC tradition, history, policies, understanding of the culture of the ANC, then you are a true South African. I do believe that. That's what you need for an ANC, for a president of the country. The values, the way you conduct yourself must be informed by that. And therefore, it should be a person who respects people, who respects everything about prioritizing the needs of our people.
And do you have those qualities?
No, I'm not saying I have those qualities. I'm not saying I have those qualities.
Okay. So do you ever think about the legacy, you know, that you would like to leave one day? And what is that legacy?
Well, I've never quite understood or even thought of the meaning of a legacy that an individual leaves. Of course, one can only say, you know, you've admired, you've respected, you've looked up to many, many courageous leaders that have led us. And that's all I want to say about legacy. I think I'd rather continue to bask in the sun and in the glory of the examples that have been set by the leaders that I came across at one point in my life.
Okay, thank you so much.